My granddaughter called me in the middle of the night. Her voice was shaking so hard I could barely understand her. The words came out broken, like glass cutting through my sleep. Grandma, I'm at the police station. My stepdad beat me, but he's telling them I attacked him, and they believe him. Do you know what it feels like when a child you once rocked to sleep whispers those words through tears? Do you know the sound your heart makes when it shatters at 2:43 in the morning? I do. I know exactly what that sounds like, because it happened to me that night, and the echo of it still haunts my dreams. When I reached the station, the officer looked up from his paperwork, turned white as a sheet, and said, "Ma'am, I'm sorry. I didn't know." That was the moment I realized something far darker was happening behind those walls. That was the moment I understood that my granddaughter wasn't just hurt. She was trapped in a system that had already decided she was lying. Before we go any further, please like this video, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. I want to know how many grandparents tonight would do exactly what I did next. Because when I stepped inside that station, I didn't just find my granddaughter in handcuffs, I found the truth they'd tried to bury. The house had been quiet that night, the way old houses get when they've settled into their bones and decided to rest. I'd been lying there listening to the grandfather clock in the hallway tick away the seconds, each one marking another moment of peace I thought I could count on. The walls around me were covered in family photos. My granddaughter at 5, gap-toothed and grinning. At 10, arms wrapped around our old golden retriever. At 15, graduation cap tilted just so, eyes bright with hope. I'd been used to late-night calls. In 73 years, you get plenty of them. Neighbors calling about suspicious noises, family members needing rides home from work, wrong numbers from drunk college kids. But when that phone buzzed against my nightstand, something cold crawled up my spine. The sound was different somehow, sharper, more urgent, like it was screaming before I even answered. The rain was coming down hard when I got in my car, each drop hitting the windshield like tiny fists pounding against glass. My hands were shaking as I gripped the steering wheel, and I couldn't tell if it was from fear or fury or the simple, horrible knowledge that everything was about to change. The wipers swept back and forth, but they couldn't clear away the dread that was building in my chest like a thunderstorm. As I drove through those empty streets, my mind kept going back to when she was little. I could still see her at 7 years old, sitting at my kitchen table with a box of crayons, drawing pictures of our family, stick figures holding hands under a yellow sun. "That's you, Grandma," she'd said, pointing to the tallest figure with the biggest smile. "You keep us all safe." How was I supposed to keep her safe from this? How was I supposed to protect her when the people who were supposed to protect her had already failed? I thought I was heading to comfort her. I thought I was driving to the police station to wrap my arms around my granddaughter and tell her everything would be okay. I didn't know I was walking into a cover-up. I didn't know I was about to discover just how deep corruption can run when it's dressed up in uniforms and badges. Those fluorescent lights in the police station hit you like a slap in the face. Everything was too bright, too sterile, too cold. And there she was, my beautiful granddaughter, sitting in a plastic chair with her wrists zip-tied behind her back, her face a map of bruises that told a story I wasn't ready to read. Her left eye was swollen shut, there was blood dried under her nose, and when she looked up at me, I saw something in her good eye that made my blood turn to ice. Defeat. This child who had never given up on anything in her life looked defeated. Standing next to her was him, her stepfather. I'd never liked the man, never trusted the way he smiled too wide and spoke too loud, but my daughter loved him, and I'd bitten my tongue more times than I could count. Now I was looking at him in that harsh light, and he was polished and composed like he'd just stepped out of a boardroom meeting. He had a single scratch on his cheek, neat, precise, like something drawn on with a red pen. His clothes weren't wrinkled, his hair wasn't messed up, and his breathing was calm and steady. The officers were nodding as he spun his story, their heads bobbing like dashboard dolls. She came at me with a kitchen knife, he was saying, his voice dripping with fake concern. I tried to calm her down, but she's been having these episodes. Drugs, I think. Maybe mental illness. She attacked me, and I had to defend myself. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab those officers by their collars and shake them until their teeth rattled. How could they look at my granddaughter, all 120 pounds of her, bruised and broken and barely able to sit up straight, and believe for 1 second that she was the aggressor? How could they look at that man, 6 feet tall, 200 pounds of muscle, without so much as a wrinkled shirt, and think he was the victim? "Excuse me," I said, my voice cutting through their conversation like a blade. "I'm her grandmother, and I demand to know what's happening here." The young officer at the desk, he couldn't have been more than 25, avoided my eyes like I was the sun, and he was afraid of going blind. The sergeant, a thick-necked man with gray hair and cold eyes, just shrugged. "Protocol, ma'am. We're conducting an investigation." Investigation. The word came out of me like a bark. What exactly are you investigating? Whether my granddaughter managed to beat herself unconscious. That's when the stepfather turned to me with that slick smile of his. "She's been troubled lately, Mrs. Patterson. This isn't the first time she's been violent." "I have documentation." Documentation. Of course he did. Men like him always have documentation, always have a paper trail that makes them look like saints and their victims look like sinners. I looked at my granddaughter again, and she was trying to say something, her lips moving so quietly I had to lean in to hear. "They don't believe me, Grandma," she whispered, and those 4 words hit me harder than any punch ever could. They don't believe me. When I demanded her release, when I told them they had no right to keep a 17-year-old girl in restraints while her attacker walked free, the sergeant actually had the nerve to tell me I was interfering with an investigation. Me, a 73-year-old woman who'd lived in this town longer than most of these officers had been alive, who'd paid taxes and voted and served on committees and volunteered at the church, I was interfering. The rage that built up in me then was like nothing I'd ever felt before. It started in my toes and worked its way up through my body until my hands were shaking and my vision was blurring and I could taste copper in my mouth. This was my granddaughter. This was my baby's baby, and they were treating her like a criminal while her abuser stood there adjusting his tie. But then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I heard it. A faint sound coming from my granddaughter's jacket pocket, the soft buzz of a phone recording. Her eyes met mine, and in that look, I saw something flicker back to life. Hope. She'd been recording. "Wait," I said, my voice suddenly steady and clear. "Before you process any charges, I think you need to hear something." The stepfather's face changed. Just for a second, the mask slipped, and I saw the real him underneath, cold, calculating, dangerous. "I don't know what she's talking about," he said quickly. "The girl is obviously delusional." But I was already moving toward my granddaughter, and the young officer, bless him, didn't try to stop me. With shaking fingers, I reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. The recording was still going. It had been going for over an hour. "Play it," I demanded, holding the phone up. "Play it right now." The sergeant tried to object, but I was done being polite. I was done being reasonable. I pressed play, and my granddaughter's voice filled that sterile room, not the broken whisper I'd been hearing, but her real voice, strong and clear and terrified. "Please stop," her voice said from the phone. "Please, I didn't do anything. I was just doing my homework." Then came his voice, and it was nothing like the smooth, concerned tone he'd been using with the officers. It was ugly and mean and full of rage. "You think you're so smart, don't you? You think you can disrespect me in my own house?" The sound of the first hit made everyone in the room flinch. Then came her scream, high and desperate and full of pain. Then another hit. And another. And through it all, her voice pleading, begging, promising to be good if he would just stop. But the worst part, the part that made my heart feel like it was being ripped out of my chest, was what came next. His voice, calm and calculating. "Now you're going to tell them you attacked me. You're going to say you came at me with a knife and I defended myself. And if you don't, I'll make sure everyone knows what a lying little whore you are." The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop in that silence. The young officer's face had gone from pale to gray, and his hands were shaking as he stared at the phone. The sergeant's mouth was hanging open like he'd forgotten how to close it. "I'm sorry," the young officer said again, but this time it wasn't an excuse. This time it was an admission. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. We didn't know. But I wasn't ready to accept apologies. Not yet. Not when my granddaughter was still sitting there in zip ties while her attacker was still free. You didn't know because you didn't want to know," I said, my voice cutting through that silence like a sword. You took one look at him, clean-cut, well-dressed, articulate, and you decided he was telling the truth. You took one look at her, young, female, vulnerable, and you decided she was lying. The stepfather was backing toward the door now, his composure finally cracking. "This is ridiculous," he was saying, but his voice was too high, too desperate. "You can't trust a recording. Anyone can fake a recording." That's when I turned on him, and I let every ounce of rage and pain and fury I'd been holding back pour out of me. "You piece of garbage," I said, and my voice was shaking with the force of my anger. "You beat a 17-year-old girl unconscious, and then had the nerve to stand here and call her a liar. You destroyed her face and then tried to destroy her credibility. What kind of monster does that? What kind of sick, twisted coward attacks a child and then tries to make everyone believe she attacked him?" He tried to answer, tried to keep up his act, but the recording was still playing. We could hear him staging his own injury, could hear him coaching her on what to say, could hear him threatening her with worse if she didn't comply. The evidence was right there, undeniable and horrific and real. The young officer was already moving to uncuff my granddaughter, his hands gentle and apologetic as he helped her to her feet. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. "I want him arrested," I said, pointing at the stepfather. "I want him charged with assault, with battery, with false imprisonment, with filing a false police report. I want a full investigation into how this was handled, and I want to know why 3 officers thought it was reasonable to believe that a man twice her size was the victim here." That's when Detective Morales walked in. I'd known him for 20 years. He'd been friends with my late husband, had attended our family barbecues, had always been good to us. When he saw the scene, when he heard the recording, his face went hard as stone. "We're reopening everything," he said, and his voice carried the weight of authority that had been missing from this whole nightmare. "Everything. Every report, every statement, every decision made tonight." As they led the stepfather away in handcuffs, finally, I heard him muttering under his breath. "This is all her fault," he was saying. "She made me do this. She pushed me too far." Even then, even caught red-handed with his own voice confessing to his crimes, he couldn't take responsibility. He couldn't admit that what he'd done was wrong. He was still trying to blame the victim, still trying to make everyone believe that somehow a 17-year-old girl was responsible for her own beating. But the truth was out now. The truth was recorded and witnessed and undeniable. And as I watched them take him away, I felt something I hadn't felt since that phone call woke me up: hope. The hospital was another kind of nightmare, but a necessary one. Under those bright examination lights, every mark on my granddaughter's body told a story she had tried to hide. The doctor was gentle but thorough, documenting each bruise, each cut, each sign of trauma with clinical precision. "This wasn't a one-time incident," he said quietly, his voice heavy with the weight of experience. "These injuries show a pattern of abuse over time. Some of these bruises are weeks old. Weeks old. My granddaughter had been suffering for weeks, maybe months, and none of us had known. Or maybe we had known, somewhere deep down, but we'd chosen not to see it. Maybe we'd been too busy with our own lives to notice that she'd been getting quieter, sadder, more withdrawn. My daughter arrived at the hospital still in her business suit, still carrying her laptop bag, her face a mask of shock and guilt and horror. She'd been on a business trip for the past week, traveling for the company she worked for, trying to provide for her family. She'd left her daughter with a man she trusted, a man she loved, a man she thought would protect her child. How did I not see it? She kept saying over and over as she sat beside her daughter's hospital bed. How did I not know? What kind of mother doesn't know her own child is being abused? I wanted to comfort her, wanted to tell her it wasn't her fault, but the truth was complicated and painful and didn't fit into neat categories of blame and innocence. The truth was that we'd all missed the signs, all failed to protect the most vulnerable person in our family. My granddaughter was awake now, the pain medication making her drowsy but alert enough to talk. When she saw her mother, she started crying, not the broken, desperate tears from the police station, but deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from the bottom of her soul. "I'm sorry, Mom," she whispered. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I wanted to, but he said no one would believe me. He said you loved him more than me. He said if I told anyone, he'd make sure everyone knew I was a liar and a troublemaker." The pain in my daughter's eyes was almost unbearable to watch. Here was her child, apologizing for being abused, apologizing for being too afraid to seek help. The manipulation had been so complete, so thorough, that even now, even safe in a hospital bed with her attacker in custody, my granddaughter still felt guilty. When the law failed us, I said, my voice steady and strong despite the tears running down my cheeks, we became our own witness, our own defense, and our own proof. No one else was going to save you, baby. So you saved yourself. You were smart enough to record what happened, brave enough to hold on to that evidence even when they were trying to make you the criminal. You saved yourself, and in doing so, you saved every other girl who might have been his next victim. The three of us sat there in that hospital room, 3 generations of women who had been broken but not defeated, wounded but not destroyed. We held each other and cried, and slowly, painfully, we began to heal. The stepfather's arrest made the local news, but not in the way I'd expected. Instead of focusing on his crimes, instead of talking about the corruption that had nearly let him walk free, the reporters wanted to know about the recording. They wanted to know how a 17-year-old girl had been smart enough to document her own abuse. The district attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Rebecca Torres, called me personally to discuss the case. "We're not just prosecuting him for this assault," she said. "We're going back through every domestic violence case he was involved in as a witness, every time the police believed his version of events over a woman's. This is bigger than just what happened to your granddaughter." That's when I learned about the others. 3 other women, over the past 5 years, who had accused him of abuse. 3 other women whose cases had been dismissed or downplayed or simply ignored. One had been his ex-wife, who'd been told she was vindictive when she reported that he'd broken her ribs. Another had been a girlfriend who'd been labeled unstable when she'd shown up at the emergency room with a concussion. The third had been a coworker who'd been accused of making it up for attention when she'd reported that he'd cornered her in the supply room and put his hands around her throat. The pattern was clear, and it was horrifying. This man had been terrorizing women for years, and the system had protected him every single time. Why? Because he was good at playing the victim. Because he was articulate and well-dressed and knew exactly what to say to make people believe him. Because the officers who took his statements had been trained to trust men like him and doubt women like his victims. Detective Morales pulled me aside after one of the interviews. "There's something else you need to know," he said, his voice heavy with shame. "The officer who first dismissed your ex-daughter-in-law's case 5 years ago? He's the same one who was ready to charge your granddaughter last night. Officer Bradley." "This isn't incompetence, Mrs. Patterson. This is a pattern." The rage that filled me then was like molten metal in my veins. Officer Bradley hadn't just failed my granddaughter, he'd been failing women for years. He'd been part of a system that protected abusers and silenced victims, and he'd been doing it deliberately, consistently, without any accountability. I demanded a meeting with the police chief. I demanded answers. I demanded change. And when I didn't get the response I wanted from the department, I took my demands to the city council. I took them to the mayor. I took them to every reporter who would listen. We need a new protocol, I told them, my voice carrying the authority of someone who had lived through hell and come out fighting. We need training that teaches officers to recognize the signs of domestic abuse, to understand how abusers manipulate the system, to believe victims instead of automatically doubting them. We need accountability for officers who fail to protect the vulnerable. We need change, and we need it now. That's how the Eleanor Protocol was born, named after my granddaughter, though she didn't want the publicity. It mandated specialized training for all officers responding to domestic violence calls. It required body cameras to be activated during all such responses. It established an independent review board to investigate cases where victims felt they hadn't been believed or protected. Officer Bradley was transferred to traffic duty, and the young officer who had helped us that night, Officer Martinez, volunteered to be part of the first training class. I never want to make that mistake again, he told me. I never want to look at a victim and see a criminal. 6 months later, I was sitting on my porch swing in the early morning light, steam rising from my coffee cup like ghosts of old troubles finally being laid to rest. The sun was just coming up over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that reminded me of new beginnings and second chances. My granddaughter was doing better. Not healed. Healing from trauma isn't that simple or that quick, but better. She was in therapy twice a week with a counselor who specialized in abuse recovery. She'd started a support group for teenage victims of domestic violence. She'd even begun speaking at schools about recognizing the warning signs of an abusive relationship. The hardest part, she'd told me the week before, isn't the physical healing. It's learning to trust your own voice again. It's remembering that when someone hurts you, it's not your fault. It's not because you deserved it or because you made them do it. It's because they chose to hurt you, and that choice was theirs alone. My daughter had joined a support group too, one for parents who had missed the signs of abuse. She was learning to forgive herself, slowly and painfully, for not seeing what was happening under her own roof. She was learning that abusers are experts at hiding their true nature, that they're skilled at making everyone around them believe they're good people who would never hurt anyone. The stepfather pled guilty to assault, battery, false imprisonment, and filing false police reports. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison and was required to attend anger management classes and pay restitution to all his victims. It wasn't enough. It could never be enough. But it was something. It was acknowledgement that what he'd done was wrong, that his victims were telling the truth, that there would be consequences for his actions. That morning on my porch, I received a letter from the police department. The envelope was official-looking, formal, and I almost didn't open it. I'd had enough of official letters and formal procedures to last several lifetimes. But inside was something I hadn't expected. A letter from Chief Morrison, handwritten rather than typed, personal rather than bureaucratic. Mrs. Patterson, it read, your story helped shape a new policy that will protect countless victims in the years to come. Your refusal to be silenced, your determination to fight for justice, your willingness to hold us accountable, all of these things have made our department better. Thank you for changing how we listen. Thank you for making sure that what happened to your granddaughter will never happen to another victim on our watch. I sat there holding that letter, watching the sunrise paint my neighborhood in gentle colors, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from forgetting or moving on, but the kind that comes from knowing you fought the good fight and made a difference. Justice isn't always a courtroom, I realized. Sometimes it's a grandmother's voice that refuses to be ignored. Sometimes it's a girl who dares to speak, and a city that finally listens. Sometimes it's the slow, painful work of changing hearts and minds and systems that have been broken for too long. That night didn't break us, it woke us. It woke us up to the reality that evil can wear a friendly face, that abuse can hide behind closed doors in nice neighborhoods, that the systems we trust to protect us can sometimes protect our attackers instead. But it also woke us up to our own strength, our own power, our own ability to fight back and demand better. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the locket I'd been wearing every day since the trial ended. Inside was a picture of my granddaughter, not from before the attack, when she was innocent and untouched by violence, but from after. A picture of her at her first speaking engagement, standing at a podium in front of a room full of teenagers, her scars visible, but her voice strong and clear and unafraid. In that picture, she wasn't a victim anymore. She was a survivor. She was a fighter. She was living proof that even when the worst happens, even when the people who are supposed to protect you fail you, even when it feels like the whole world is against you, you can still find your voice. You can still tell your truth. You can still change the world, one story at a time. From that night on, no one in this family would ever be silenced again. We learned too much about the power of speaking up, about the importance of being believed, about the responsibility we all have to protect the vulnerable and hold the powerful accountable. The grandfather clock in my hallway chimed 7 times, marking another hour of peace, another hour of safety, another hour in a world where my granddaughter could sleep without fear. And as I sat there on my porch swing, watching the sun rise over a neighborhood that looked the same but felt different somehow, I made a promise to every grandmother, every parent, every child who might be reading this story. If it happens to you, if someone hurts you and tries to make you believe it's your fault, if the people who are supposed to protect you fail you, know that your voice matters. Know that your truth is worth telling. Know that somewhere out there, there's a grandmother who believes you, who will fight for you, who will never stop until justice is done. Because that's what we do. That's what love looks like when it's tested by fire and comes out stronger. That's what family means when the worst happens and we refuse to let it destroy us. That's what my granddaughter taught me that night, that even in our darkest hour, even when everything seems lost, we still have the power to change our story. We still have the power to demand better. We still have the power to make sure that what happened to us never happens to anyone else. And that power, that voice, that refusal to be silenced, that's what justice really looks like. Not just in courtrooms, not just in official policies, but in the everyday courage of ordinary people who refuse to let evil win. That night changed everything. But in the end, it didn't break us. It made us unbreakable.